Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images. This is the first part of my review of Fuji's 30mm tilt shift lens that was announced recently. I've had one here to test for a while. Now it's going to go back to Fuji, unfortunately. So I'm doing this first part, which is the physical side of it. There will be more reviews looking at aspects of image quality, comparisons with, say, the Canon TSE-24. Doesn't do well against it, but you'd expect that. And a few other matters, and there will be a detailed written review of this with lots of photos, lots more examples covering technical aspects of the lens that I don't really cover that much in the videos. But this is about what the lens is like to use. Now, I've been able to get a fair bit of use out of it. Some of you may know we had some family concerns recently, which has sort of put a bit of a block on being able to do quite as much testing as I really wanted. But I have got more than enough images to confirm that this is by far and away the best quality in terms of image quality tilt shift lens that I've ever used on a camera, on a mirrorless camera, or a DSLR for that matter. Some would say so it ought to be, given how much it costs. Do you get value for money out of it? Well, it depends really what you want to do and what you want from it. I've been using it on the GFX100S. I've tried it briefly on the GFX100 Mark II, mainly because somebody asked me whether the improved viewfinder on the GFX100 Mark II made it easier to do manual focusing. I'm going to say no. Maybe it does for some people, but remember that I do 75% of my photography is using manual focus lenses, so I am very used to doing manual focusing. So perhaps the advantages that the viewfinder on here, and it's a very nice viewfinder, gives you would be more noticeable to some people, particularly if they're not used to using a lens like this. And using a lens like this does need experience. Tilt shift lenses are vastly more than just about the miniature world effect. In fact, I've written a book all about how to use tilt shift lenses, but I'll come back to that when I'm actually showing some of the photos and things. This is an image I took in some local woods. It is shifted upwards, it is sharp all over, but I say this is not about the image quality, this is about the physical lens. And it's quite a hefty old beast. Now you can see that it's very solidly built. There's no obvious plasticiness about this at all, and it's here we go, Fujinon GF lens 30mm 5.6 TS and that's it. That tells you what it is. For f5.6, you think, well, that's a bit on the small side. It's because if you're using this with shift and tilt as well, but certainly with shift, you don't need the wider aperture for most applications of a lens like this. And in fact, to produce the kind of image quality that this gives at the f3.5 that you get from the Canon TSE-24 would be very difficult, very expensive, and I doubt you could get, for sheer optical reasons, the kind of image quality you get. Now, this has got plus or minus 15mm of shift. The tilt is 8.5 degrees or thereabouts. The two axes can be rotated. They're currently at 90 degrees here, so at the moment the shift is up down and the tilt is that way. You can rotate it. There's a little tab here that also allows you to rotate the mount so that you can have shift and tilt at any direction you want. Now you notice I've got this ring and foot attached to it. Well, why for that? Well, it's quite a heavy lens. In fact, the lens is heavier than the GFX100S, I believe, fractionally. And it's more stable, and if you're doing stitching things, it's easier from a stitching point of view, reduces potential parallax errors. If the front of the lens is fixed and the back moves and the camera moves. Now I'll come back to that, the difference between having the lens move and the camera move when I look at some of the details of the pictures. It does make a difference, but it's not that much of a difference. You just have to allow for it. So when I say that I've applied vertical shift to an image, that means in this instance, because I was using the foot, I shifted the camera downwards. It's the opposite, so it works the other way around. So I've got that. The tabs here are nice, the controls are all nice and solid. There's no real slack in it. Obviously this is a new lens, it's not been like my old TSE 224, the TSE 17 that I've had for 15 years and have been used a lot, so they slacken off a bit, but no signs of anything here gonna go loose on it. The foot is an interesting bit. I'll just slacken it off. If you slacken it off, the lens rotates inside the foot, which you do need for different, if you're doing different types of movements, but it doesn't open completely, so there's no danger of the lens falling out. You have to actually physically lift that, and then off it comes, and there's the ring. Now the ring itself, just put the lens down there, the ring itself has screw fit, has 3/8 and 1/4 inch screw fit. It is not grooved down the side, so it's not an Arca Swiss type foot. I used it a lot. If you've seen it in any of my other videos, you'll have seen this. This is from a Benro tripod, and it's just a screw fit Arca Swiss plate. If you're going to use something like this, I use the Allen key to tighten it up really good and solid and make sure it won't shift. There's no movement there, and that allows me to move it, to fit it to a tripod much easier. Now you can see this is flipped back in while I was moving it, and it's locked. Where it come out, open it up like that, clicks into place, and then you can tighten it as well to actually get to hold the lens in place more securely. So that's the foot for it. That's what you will also need if you want an Arca Swiss type mount on it. Now, I mentioned the construction of it. The lens construction itself, it's internally focusing, which means that the front element doesn't move. And if I remember rightly, when you focus it, and it is manual focus, so there are stops here, I believe the focus, I wasn't able to test this entirely, but I believe the focus goes slightly past infinity. There is EXIF data. You will need to update the firmware on the camera to the latest firmware to be able to, for the camera to take note of the EXIF data. What extra data do you get? You get the amount of shift, and you also get the rotation of the mount. Now I can show that fairly easily here, because if I release that tab, there we go. You can see it moving. Now the steps here, they're 30-degree steps. I prefer it with 15-degree steps rather than 30-degree steps. Makes it a little bit awkward. There we go, there's one, there's another one. So it allows you to rotate that. Likewise, you can rotate the tilt movement with respect to the shift movement as well, so you can get all the different settings on it. There is, I mentioned internal focusing, there's no movement of the back end of the lens there, so it is fully internal. So let's just pop a cap back on that. Good throw on here. You can see if I go from here, you can get an idea of how much throw there is. It's only around about 100 degrees or so. I would prefer, since I'm using a lens like this, manual focusing, I would personally prefer a bit more lens throw just to give a bit more finesse in the focusing, but there's no real problem with it. The focus data is also sent back, the focus setting. So focus setting, obviously, in a normal lens and with a shifted lens, focus setting is the distance. Once you add tilt, everything changes. Now I'll cover that in the written review, where I'll also have some tilt tables that make things a bit easier to work out the settings and stuff for this. But there are locks on all the movements. Don't over tighten them. You know, it is possible to over tighten these screws, and from previous experience with lenses like this, over tightening the knobs and things like this does not do them any good in the long term. There was no sticking, there's no problem with light coming in it. It's just a very solidly built lens. Now, you may notice that at the front of it here, if I look very carefully, the front element protrudes very slightly. Now, this is a 30mm lens. It's equivalent field of view on a full frame camera, 35mm camera, of about a 24, which is why I'll have some comparisons with the Canon TSE 24, which is a lens I've used on my 5DS for many years. Excellent lens. Well, I used to say it was a really good lens. Now, having used this one, it's good, but it's 24mm. If you made this 24mm, it would give you the equivalent of, say, about 17 on a full frame. So you can see making wide lenses is difficult. Making wide lenses with a huge great image circle at the back to cover that image, that medium format sensor, and allow for shift, that's tricky as well. But what about all these things I've got piled up on the front here? Now, there are 2 lens caps come with it. Now, the first lens cap, you think, oh, no, you can't put that on there because actually you touch the front element. There is a ring that goes on it, screws in there, and then the lens cap fits on there. Now you think, well, that's okay. What size is that? Can I put filter? You can't put filters on it. I hadn't got a filter size that would fit it. There may be some. I'm sure some people will experiment more with this. I've got a filter here. If you want filters, you have to take this adapter ring off, put on, and this is good movement there. So we've now got that. I'll then put the lens hood, which is supplied with it. That screws on the lens hood there. And I've now got a filter ring setting on the inside here. Now, that's where the larger lens cap comes in. So that goes on there. So we've got that. Can't use this small one anymore. So that's that. And if you really want, this is a Fuji supplied this one. This is a 105mm. This is just a basic protection filter. And so when I send it back to Fuji, I'll put that back on it. I don't use it myself. I did just put it on here and test. It causes no vignetting or anything. Is there a slight loss of quality through the glass? Well, if it is, it's pretty negligible. If you are concerned, if you're using this in sort of harsher environments and you want to keep salt spray off the front lens, then it's much cheaper to fix one of these than it is accidentally mess up your front element. Front element's not that big, but remember it is only a f5.6 lens. Goes up to f32. I can hit some people looking at the specs and thinking f32, that's completely useless. Why would you ever use f32? Think of the diffraction. Well, do that, think of the diffraction and then ignore it. Yeah, sure, the lens gets a bit softer as you go to f22 up to f32. Yeah, it gets a bit softer, but sometimes you need the depth of field. If you're using combination of tilt as well, then you may accept a slightly softer image because you can always sharpen things up. Now, you can't completely correct for diffraction, but you can certainly sharpen things up a lot. So it may be for the shot you want, particularly with tilt or something like that, that you absolutely want f32. Now, I never come across any situations where I need it, but that doesn't mean that you don't, because I don't tend to use tilt very much at this focal length. Tilt is good for placing the plane of focus where you want, and I'll have lots more of that in the written review and the the review looking at pictures and things. But there's no need for any tilt on the scene here. This is purely taken care of with shift. So I've got that. Tilt works very well on it. f5.6, don't expect razor thin. Well, you will get a pretty thin depth of field, be a plane of focus, but don't expect the out of focus areas to be massively soft. At f3.5 on the TSC24, yes, I do see that. I get a softer there, but you need to go much wider aperture than that. If you really want to use sort of creative effects of tilt, you can do miniature world effects with this, but it's less dramatic because at f5.6 the plane of focus is not quite as sharp and it doesn't fall off to the soft areas nearly as much. And you'll notice I handle it quite carefully. It's just heavy enough that you don't want to dump it down. It's a nice bit of kit there. That's the filter holder. That's the holder where the filter came in. So we've got that, and whatever. Now, I mentioned the data that you get off the lens. That's distance data, but also shift and direction of shift. That's great. Some software, Capture One, could make use of that, and I'm sure before long other software applications for processing your RAW files will be able to make use of the offset lens correction data that's needed for something like this. Lens correction works fine on it. For yeah, actually, and I'll look at image quality obviously much more, there is almost no discernible chromatic aberration. In terms of distortion, I'll have more on that. There is no shift vignetting on it. Most lenses, you get the mount and whatever causes some degree of physical vignetting in the opposite direction to you'd expect it for this. Now, I'll have charts and things for this in the written review, but suffice to say this lens does not have it. Every other lens I've looked at, every other sort of shift lens has shown it to some degree, but on this, partly because it's f5.6, partly because of the sheer size of the aperture at the back here of the hole for the light, there's no baffles or anything, partly because there is no vignetting. Now that means if you want to shift and stitch images, the images stitch together really well. So that's working with that. Now, just one mention of the things I mentioned about using with the foot, you are reversing it. So do remember that you've got the lens attached to your tripod via the ring here, and you're shifting the camera up and down. I do have one slight concern, and it's related to the weight of it, is that if I'm quite happy, have been for years, walking around with the 5DS and TSE24 on a strap, walking around, just using them as a walk round lens. The weight of this and the weight of the camera is enough that that's a lot of stress is going on the mount. Now, I don't have any evidence that says there's any weaknesses or anything in the mount. I don't know this at all, but it is just enough weight here that I found myself being more careful carrying it around. Now, I used this quite regularly handheld. The image stabilization, excellent in the 100S, even better here in the 100 Mark II, although you don't actually notice much difference. It's mainly a specs thing, I'm sure. Yes, it is actually better here, much like the viewfinder is better here, particularly if you get the adapter plate and you want to use the tilt-up viewfinder. The standard one doesn't tilt up, but if you're using that, I found that combination of using the internal level and practice over years of having used tilt shift lenses handheld meant I had no difficulties in using this handheld. I do believe that particular shot there was taken handheld. I can't remember. I'd need to check some of the setup out. I had a tripod with me, but I don't think I used it in this particular instance here. That's one where I just taken it, used fast enough shutter speed and relied on the image stabilization. It works fine. So there you go. And I think that's about it on the physical side of the lens, and that'll do this particular aspect of this bit of the review. Unfortunately, the lens has now to be packed away and will be taken away by Fuji tomorrow, and well, we'll see whether one of my own turns up at some point. But anyway, if you've got any questions, let me know, and as I say, all of this stuff will appear in the written review, and there will be other video reviews looking at aspects of image quality and use of the lens, in particular using tilt shift and all the factors for it. But I'll give you a sneak preview by saying it's a really excellent quality lens. From an optics point of view, I have no serious complaints whatsoever about it. So anyway, there you go. Hope that's been of interest, and I'll be back for the next stage of this. Unfortunately not with the lens. So bye.